There is nothing in this video but a black screen. Now, I am tired. I have been up for nearly 24 hours because I've been busy working on something. And currently I don't have any videos scheduled out immediately. I need to take some time to schedule them out. I've been so busy working on stuff recently. I decided I was going to just record something quickly, and right now I'm sleep deprived enough to want to talk about this. In fact, I know the black screen and all this will make some people not want to watch this, and in many ways I'm kind of doing that intentfully because really this is the sort of thing where I'm not really sure if I really want to do this, and I would be almost happy if people didn't watch it. I guess if I do decide to do this, I might as well turn it into a series though, because I have a lot to talk about. And so what is this? I know a lot of people will tell their life stories, and I enjoy listening to people's life stories. I love people. And I have had a lot of experience with all sorts of different people over the course of my life. I'm still not very old. I'm sure I've got plenty more life experiences to come before me. I am 26 at the time of this recording, but I'm getting pretty close to 27 in a few months. There is more for me to say, but I'm going to start off talking about, well, I guess what came before me, because there is, of course, a history to anyone and everyone, where they come from and who made them in the end of this. So, unfortunately, my family history, as anyone, there's good and bad, but unfortunately, my immediate family has kind of had a lot of tragedy before I came about. In fact, well, you'll see. The thing about my life, and something which I can say about probably the people immediately around me, is that it's not like the worst that's ever been experienced, or the best that's ever been experienced, but when you say it, it almost, when I say it to other people, which I don't say it to other people very often for this very reason, it sounds out there in a lot of ways, because it's almost, there's elements of it which are absolutely horrible, and there's elements of it which are absolutely terrific. Unfortunately, the period of which I come into the picture is around a period of tragedy, so there is, unfortunately, more focus on the negative before I come around. Before I'm born is what I'm basically saying. Also, before I say all this, I hope this is coherent enough. Again, I've not slept for almost 24 hours. Like, this is the first take I've done this. I'm not going to do another take. Just me sort of tiredly rambling here. So, the history of my family before I came into the picture. My dad was born before my mother, so I guess I'll start with him. So my dad was born through a sort of extravagant story. My grandmother has been a nurse for most of her life. She retired a few years ago finally, and she is currently in her 80s, so yeah, she worked a very long, hard life, I should mention. She never had much luck with men, and I'm not even for sure if she really ever had an interesting husband. I never really asked her about that. She had two husbands, though, and we'll get to why. The first one was a temporary thing. Basically, it was this guy, and I've never known him. He died long before I was born, but he was a musician, a singer specifically. I've heard one song that he sang in my whole entire life. Mainly it's a memento that my dad had, which he dug up, not from his collection, because that man was not a figure in my father's life, really. He was very much a playboy. He had children with many women, so my dad has a lot of half-brothers. He was a good singer. He was relatively handsome as well, and so he got around quite a bit. I almost feel sorry for this guy, because I think deep down, from what I know of him, and having met a lot of the half-brothers and people who knew him better than me, because my dad and other people in the family took an interest, I guess, I think he wanted to be a sincere man, form a family and all that, and tried a few times, and I think every time he tried to tell himself this was going to be the time he was going to be able to live this sort of settled-down lifestyle. Fortunately, though, he never did, and really, I don't feel pity for him. When I say almost feel bad, it's not the same as feeling bad. It's more like he's very pitiful, I guess is the word that you can use to say it. He was a good singer. He won this big contest thing, which is the only song I've heard from him because it was broadcast on the radio and some other stuff. When they were doing a search for talent across the US thing by some big networks, and he ended up being the winner of that. I'm not going to talk much more about him. Just know my dad has a lot of half-brothers. I've met a number of them. A few years ago, we went on a big old road trip and met up with a lot of extended family, and that includes some various amounts of my dad's half-brothers, and I guess would be my uncles, or half-uncles, whatever, uncles. But going forth from that, I say uncles, but I've mainly have met brothers as opposed to daughters. I've met one daughter of his, but I've mostly met the males, which is why I'm saying uncles, is because, and also the ones I've spent a little bit more time with are uncles, so it's what registers in my head. Anyways, the story behind how my dad was born was a little bit amusing, I guess. Basically, I don't remember the specifics. In fact, my grandmother only came out about this to my father very recently. My dad did not know this for the longest time, not until like within the last 2 years. And keep in mind, of course, he's known her all of his life. My dad's over 50 years old. She's over 80, so basically the baseline of this is that she was on a plane, I guess, after a showing, and the two of them got busy on the plane. That is the baseline story of this. Anyways, he thought he was going to try and get down, or settle down with her, not get. Well, he did get down with her, if you know what I mean. But he decided that he was going to go on the road and leave my dad behind. So my dad was born. And to finish off my, as of this, I guess this would be the position of him, to finish my grandfather's side of this story, my first grandfather, because we're going to get to my mother's side pretty soon, trust me, that's a doozy. But anyways, for my dad's side of the family, his grandfather, who I've never known in my life, I've never met him, I've seen pictures of him, I've heard one song of him, and I've heard collections of him by other members of my family, but all the same, just to close off his chapter, the most involvement my dad ever had with him, because my dad didn't really know him as a kid, he didn't grow up with him in the picture here, was when he turned 18. My dad decided to try and reach out to him. He sent a letter to his father, and his father responded, and they did meet up once for a cafe. I don't remember the specifics of the story off the top of my head, but I do know essentially the baseline was this guy was trying again to live serious with some family, and apparently the woman he was settled down with had the child, and she did not know about all of the children he had with women previously, so he just didn't want my dad in his life, which I guess he tried to be nice about, but frankly, you know what, douchebag. Anyways, that's getting him out of the picture. Why did I start with him? I don't know why I start with him, because I got a lot more which I can say about my dad and my grandmother. I guess I'll go with my grandmother next, because I started with him. So my grandmother, she is honestly a terrific woman, but she was very hardworking. Unfortunately, wasn't very present with my dad and his sister, which we'll talk more about the sister in a moment. They were born by two different men. As I said earlier, she had two husbands. And for her story, what should I share about her? She's still alive, and all I'm going to say is I'm going to be incredibly sad. Like, I'm afraid of when she's going to die, because I would not be who I am today if it wasn't for her. Just this sad. She is a complete sweetheart, but not a sweetheart in like, oh, she's always nice. She's stern when she wants to be. She's a very strong woman, but sweetheart because she does care a lot. Not just about like me, just about people who are close to her. I was her first grandson, and she reminds me about that a lot, trust me, because she will say herself in her own words to me a lot, but I don't mind her saying it. When I was born, it was one of the happiest days of her life. I was the first grandchild that she'd ever had, and she was apparently there to, I guess, with the family during that period of time, because she was really excited for me to be born. She wasn't a very big stay figure, unfortunately, in my dad and his sister's life, I guess. The reason for this is because she had to work hard. Again, she had two husbands, and we've covered the first one. I'll cover the second one in a second, but I don't really know much about him. I'm also not blood related to him, and we'll talk about that one just a little bit as well. But her story was that she spent most of her life as a nurse, and as she was busy all the time, unfortunately, they mostly had to have babysitters for my dad and his sister. And through their entire life and growing up, they did get to spend time with her, of course, but they got a lot more used to having to sort of spend time on their own and do their own thing. For my grandmother's side, she was very busy, hardworking, until eventually she retired. And she lived in Washington for a number of years. When I was born, I was used to her living with Washington, and Washington became a second home for me, but I'll talk more about that in another video. Ultimately, she did move to California through the request of her daughter, or my dad's sister, my aunt, as it were. And she's currently living in the house that she wants to move out of. She first lived in this one house in California, which she enjoyed, but unfortunately became too expensive in the neighborhood they lived in. So she moved to this apartment, and she does not like it. It's not a terrible apartment, but it's not really suited for her. And she's planning to very soon move. I'm not sure she's decided a place yet, and of course there's some concern because she's in her 80s, but what are you gonna do? So I want to say so much more about her, but I'm gonna save most of my stories with my grandmother when we get to, you know, I guess my life and experiences with her. All I can say indefinitely for now is I love her very much. Like, again, I can tell you I would not be the kind-hearted soul I am today if it wasn't for her, and having been partially raised by her. She raised me and my siblings a lot. I spent a lot of time with her because we used to visit her all the time, but we'll get to that later. So then the other, I guess, person on my father's side I should mention before I get to, of course, my dad and his sister, is my sister's dad. I don't know much about him. He's not very immediately related to my family. I've never really heard stories about him. The only things I know about him is he was married to my grandmother for, I think, somewhere between 3 to 5 years. I don't know the precise number. He didn't leave. He was a good man, apparently. That's about the extent of what I know. And then, of course, how he died. He was killed in a firebombing. So he didn't leave. He was murdered. So the specifics of the firebombing, there were some interesting theories about that, but nothing's been proven. My dad took an interest because apparently the firebombing might have been linked to a bigger thing. He wasn't the target. He was in the barber shop apparently playing cards when it happened, but somebody in the group apparently was kind of an important person, and there's some fun digging deep you can go into there of why that occurred. But anyways, so before I get to my dad, I'll go talk about his sister next, because I guess I'm going in order of priority stuff. Priority as in how close they are to me. And I've known my aunt, and I do love my aunt. I've met her quite a few times. I don't know why I even say I met her. I see her like every year. So usually it's around Christmas time when I see her. I used to see her more often. She is who I know as Aunt Frania. And Aunt Frania, essentially, when she was growing up, she was this mega popular girl in school. I should also mention, my dad was the opposite. They were the sort of sibling pair where one was, well, she's blonde, she was beautiful, she was very preppy, all this fun stuff. She was very well liked, one of the most popular girls in her school even, and we're going to get more into that story in a little bit. Give me 1 second. I didn't know how to pause this, so sorry about that. Somebody wants to ask me something. So, continuing the story. So, Aunt Frania, she was very popular when she was rising up. I'm trying to remember what I was just saying, picking up from that. I guess the way to describe her, she was very successful in life, and she wasn't successful by pure chance. She worked hard. Even though she was popular and all that, she wasn't dumb, and she did a lot of things right. And I'm not gonna say she didn't just marry in for the money. There's more to this, but she did marry into an extremely rich family. Because of her relation there, there's a lot of interesting folks I've met in the family. When I say she married someone rich, it's people that own like beaches and, well, anyways, I'm not going to get into the full specifics there because I don't really want to dig too deep into all this, but I've known both her and her husband and their 2 children, which I'll talk more about when I talk more about my own history, because they're both younger than me, so of course I was there when they were born. I've known them since they've grown up. But her story for Aunt Frania is that she married a man named Charles, who I know as Uncle Charles, and they are the aunt and uncle, the only aunt and uncle which I'm super close to, because, well, for starters, it's my dad's, sister, and it's outside of my grandmother, they're the family, which, the immediate family, which, not immediate family, but the family which is more immediate than the rest of my family. I've known other bits of the family, but Aunt Frania and Uncle Charles and their 2 children, who are William and Lily, or Will and Lil, they're the ones who I've happened to know the most, and I've got a lot of stories with them, but we'll get to that, I guess. Anyway, she grew up to be quite successful, and she's still very energetic and preppy, I can tell you that. Let's see. So then, after getting most of the background, people around my dad's immediate family out of the way, I can talk more about my dad here. And I'm not going to tell his whole life story, of course. I'm not sure how much he wants me to share. In fact, they probably might be upset if they knew some of the stuff I'm probably going to be saying during this, but that's part of the fun, right? So, my parents are still alive, by the way. They're not even really that old. My mom's in her late 40s, my dad's in his 50s. But, okay. So, talking about my dad's side, he is very intelligent, I should say. He's not like the most intelligent person out there, but he is higher. Intellectually, he's very smart. So, for example, his IQ is somewhere between, I forget the exact number, but it's between 160 and 180. Because his IQ was high enough, there was a period of time, which I'm about to talk about, when he joined the army, where he was basically given a lot more reign of what position he could have because of his IQ. Even though he's intellectually smart, if I'm going to be frankly honest, and trust me, this will become very apparent when I start telling more stories, I think emotionally he is very dumb. He is very in tune with logic, not very in tune with the emotional side of things. And he's not a cold man. In fact, in many ways he's very emotional, but I think that his emotional maturity is he's very immature in a lot of ways, but we'll get more to that, I guess. He's not a bad person, though, in the end, despite the fact that there are some things that I'm going to say during the course of this which may make him sound pretty horrible, because frankly he's done some pretty horrible things, but we'll talk more about that later. But he's also done a lot of good things, and there's overall, the best thing I can say about him is that he's gotten a lot better with age. We'll get, that's a very heavy statement I just said, we'll talk more about that, I'm sure. Okay. So, my dad, he grew up kind of the awkward kid in school. He loved school in many ways. He really liked seeking out knowledge. And when he went to college for many years because he got an opportunity, which I'm skipping ahead now. I guess I'll go back, rein it back in. Again, I'm like, this is impromptu. I don't have any script or any notes or anything I'm following. I'm just kind of talking. Not to mention I've been up for a very long time, so this is tired ramblings. He grew up, and of course, as I just mentioned, my grandmother was always busy, so he didn't really spend much time with her, and his sister was very popular while he wasn't, so he had some friends, of course, and he enjoyed his life well enough, but I don't think, because he lacked a father figure in his life, and because his mother was busy all the time, and because he wasn't really as popular as Frania, I think he somewhat developed something akin to... I think the reason he's kind of emotionally stinted is because he never really had a good chance to grow in this way, I guess. That's my impression, not what he's, of course, told me, but... Ultimately, I'm going to skip to more when I get into the picture. He has a lot of stories, things I can say about him. He, in his late teenage, early adult years, was very heavy activist. He pushed really hard for acts of activism. One thing which I have is there was some government transfer on a train, and he, with a few other people, tied themselves to train tracks. He joined the army because he didn't want his mother to pay for him, my grandmother again, because she was always working hard, and it was something that they couldn't really afford. So because the army could pay your way through college, he joined the army, and he was very happy with his position. He never actually fought anything, because what happened is he was situated into Hawaii, and during a training exercise, he was crossing a bridge as constructed in this kind of high part of Hawaii, and the bridge, as he was crossing it, broke. He wasn't the only person on it, but when it broke, he capsized. I don't know how long. I've been to Hawaii before, so I have an idea of how long it might be, because I don't even know what island he was situated on, but it was a long ways down, and he didn't, let's just say that he broke his leg very badly at that time. And so he was discharged, and in the end, though, I think that was a blessing, especially with some of the time period. If he had stayed in the army, I don't think things would have ended up as nicely. And because of his discharge and it being recognized and all that, he ended up being the fucking government paying his way through college, and he took full advantage of that. I think he was in college stuff for like 12 years. He took all sorts of degrees and designs. One thing that he did, which I remember most fondly, and because he's got some interesting stories about it, is when he took, I think it was a year or two, I don't remember if it was a year or two, but he went and transferred and did overseas school in China, and his stories are very interesting. So relations between China and the US and travel weren't as big at that point. So him being white in China, they were not very shy about doing odd things, like coming up and feeling his skin and other things. I know it sounds kind of weird, especially by today's standards when we're all so connected and know everyone, but that's apparently where it was at back then. But he enjoyed this time. He knows Chinese, but he's forgotten a lot of it because he doesn't really actively use it much. He just remembers most of the key things now. When I was younger, I used to be able to speak a lot better, but anyways. So I'm just gonna say this. I'm not gonna share everything, of course, for starters, off of whatever comes to my head when I'm talking, I guess. But I'm not gonna censor myself or protect people that are close to me just because they're close to me, I guess. There was... So, my dad at the time, he wasn't really a hippie, but he was a little bit in the freedom movement. But I think his emotional, what I'm calling his emotional stinting, kind of got in the way of a lot of things in his life. And one, of course, would be, what you would expect, your love life. One thing which I can say, which I think is relevant to this, and I've only heard this secondhand from my mother, not from him, so I can't say too much about this. But I hear that one time some girl that he was dating ended up cheating on him, and his response to that was apparently that, I'm sorry, this is like false information. Again, I've only heard this story once, and it's from my mother, who didn't even know him really at the time, so I don't know the full story here. I guess he splintered one of her wardrobes with an axe. Very horror movie-esque, and he's never actually murdered anyone or hurt anyone like that, so don't worry too much there. I guess he just had the idea over some sort of fit of rage to destroy a cabinet. I don't know why, and again, I don't really know the full context of the story. It's just, I'm almost am prone to believe it's not true, because that's a little bit out there, even for some of the things that he's done later, but I'm just sharing what I kind of recall, because it's kind of a noteworthy thing. He met my mother, who we'll talk more about pretty soon, when he was traveling. He was going to Oregon because he had decided that he was going to live in Oregon, because he grew up in I forgot to mention where they fucking grew up in this whole entire time. Okay, so my grandmother and Frania, my dad, they lived in Texas. They did move elsewhere for a period of time. Even though he grew up in Texas, he doesn't have a Texan accent, and part of this is because he watched a lot of TV again. His mother was always busy. His sister was popular. He didn't have very many friends, especially, first elementary school growing up, so he spent a lot of time at home. And because he spent a lot of time at home, he watched a lot of TV. And on TV, he saw that people with Texan sort of accents got made fun of a lot on television. And also he didn't really spend as much time around other people as maybe some other people around there. So he ended up growing up without a Texan accent. He just sort of took on the accent of what they used on the telly. Okay, to talk about this though, he was moving to Oregon. He wanted to move there, and his reason for moving was because of the mountains. He loved the idea of mountains. There's a few things my dad absolutely loves. Some of these things include space, whales, mountains. But he moved to Oregon for the mountains, as it were, and while he was driving there, my mother was hitchhiking. We'll get more to her story in a bit, so I'm not going to say too much on her side yet. He picked her up, and I guess that's where things started. Ultimately, I'm going to save my birth for a bit. So, you know what? I think it's all I'm going to share on my pre-dad story. I don't want to say too much on their stories before I was in the picture, because I can't, I'm not collecting what they've experienced. Of course, I wasn't born yet. I'm just kind of giving some rundowns to give a basic idea, and this whole video is going to be stuff before I was born, basically. And the early years I can't remember very well, because obviously I was a baby, but all the same. Okay, so my mother, she is very tragic in many ways. If my dad's story is a bit more standard, and I know when I opened this I mentioned tragedy, honestly, my mother's is more the side of this. So to give a rundown, my mother grew up in a very different sort of setting. She wasn't born in America. She was born in Canada, but moved to America at a young age. She lived in Oregon for a number of years, which is why I guess the hitchhiking thing didn't happen, because she needed to go back to Oregon. He was going to Oregon, so all the same. But she has had tragedy around her all her life. So she had a mother and a father. The mother died before I was born. I'll get more into that in a little bit, so I've never met her. The dad is still alive, but I've never met him, but trust me, there is good reason. So, her dad, from a young age, molested her several times. Ultimately, her descriptions of it, she didn't understand what was really going on. Because, of course, she's just a child. I think this was like pre-5 years old age, even. And ultimately, I guess he got caught and went to jail, which, that's good. In my eyes, my mother's father is not really family to me. He apparently, I know this, he's still alive. In fact, he doesn't even live that far away from where I currently am. He doesn't live in the same city, but he lives in like a few cities away. It would be like less than an hour's drive to drive there. And frankly speaking, I am okay never meeting him in my life. I'm a little bit worried because my mom has recently taken the initiative to contact him, and I don't think it's for the best, but I understand her reasoning. We'll talk more about that way in the future. In my eyes, as far as I'm concerned, he is no family to me. So anyways, the molesting is only the beginning for unfortunate tragedies. So after that, the next huge incident which occurred in her life is when she was between the ages of 11 to 13. She and a bunch of her friends were sort of playing around, and they stupidly got the idea to get inside of a car. Now, the car was parked on a slanted hill and was in park mode. They managed to get the car out of park mode, and it started driving off backwards. Apparently, it gained velocity and got into a crash, and the crash ended up killing everyone in the car except for her. She was the sole survivor. So, add on to the earlier stuff, a tinge of survivor's guilt. And to end off her bigger tragedies, not the smaller ones, when she was 19 years old or so, her mom got cancer and ultimately ended up dying of said cancer. So, from a very early age, she had a lot of tragedy surrounding her, as I'm sure you can sort of indulge what I just said. And she made a difficult decision. Well, okay, I'll say it like this. I love my mother, I really do. But unfortunately, just like my dad, both of them, it's kind of very easy to follow a lot of things about them based off things that happened from a young age. I think that's true of everyone, but it's really obvious in their cases. Unfortunately, my mom is one of the most dramatic people I've ever known. And not because she tries to be dramatic. I think that she is so used to sort of being the victim to a lot of things. And frankly, it's understandable, but it's a little bit saddening sometimes. She's also the type of person that cannot hide her emotions for the life of her. I'll talk a lot more about this a little bit later, I'm sure, but she's the type of person who she can't hold a thought in. If she'll try to, and you can see her try, she can't hide her emotions on her face, she can't hold back whatever she's thinking. She will usually just say it. And even when she tries to hold it in, she might hold it in for like 10-20 minutes, but then this is a really good example of this. Like, let's say that there's a fight, and she tries to not say something in the fight. She holds it in for 10-20 minutes, and the fight will like already be over, be cooled off, and then she'll just blurt out and say like she can't hold it in any longer, and it'll reignite. Sometimes it'll reignite it all over again, but it depends. So ultimately, she met my dad, and there is one interesting thing, again, which I could say early in, which is related to me. My mother's mother, my grandmother, who again I never knew because she died of cancer. The only grandparent I've ever known is my dad's mother, because my dad's father was, a playboy, and frankly, he died before I was born, A, and B, Then on my mother's side, my mom's mom died of cancer, and my mom's dad is still alive, but he's no family to me as far as I'm concerned. So, my mother's mother told my mom, or basically her daughter, to not marry my dad. I guess she had a bad feeling about him. But life goes in its own ways. Ultimately, I was a pre-marital baby. In fact, probably in big part, maybe they would have never gotten married if it wasn't for me coming to the picture. I was a happy little accident, you could say. Now, of course, they have now been married for like over 25 years. Because they didn't get married till after I was born even, I think that, like, they have their wedding photos, and I'm in their wedding photos, so I'll say that's a little bit of context of where their relationship is at. I am older than their marriage. Oh, sorry, there's a bag right there next time I kicked in. I was just kind of stretching out for a second. So, I guess I can talk a little bit about the early years, because this is where the actual story begins. The story of my life, which I hope to share in pretty complete detail. Slowly but surely, I'm not really sure. There's no schedule to these. I guess I'll just record them when I feel like them and move bit by bit. I might describe more of my family history and my parents and, growing up and all that, but that's pretty much the basics of what relates to me being born. And unfortunately, the reason why my mother's tragedies come into the picture come into the last thing I'm about to say. So, my mother's tragedies and the era which she was growing up in unfortunately led her at the time to a life of drugs. And there is an unfortunate fact which I did not know till much later. My mom still hasn't told me. It was my sister that ended up telling me. I should also clarify, if you're curious, I have a younger brother and a younger sister. To talk about that, I don't want to say she was doing a pretty hard-hitting drug when she was pregnant with me. She was kind of stupid like that, and she unfortunately came out fine, but she did some major risk stuff. Ultimately, she did give up drug use, which is good, of course. And the reason, partially, is because she had an encounter with a friend of hers where I guess her and her friend were doing something really stupid, and they were probably going to get, well, raped, frankly. But they were doing it for the drugs, and there was something that occurred. I don't remember the exact details because my mother doesn't like to talk about that period of her life, maybe for a very obvious reason. But there was some sign from God. Now, before I say all this, I should clarify I am a complete and utter atheist, and my atheism, as I'm sure you'll sort of pick up on as I talk more about this, or more about my life, I guess, is partially from my exposure to religion. But we'll talk more about that later. For now, all you need to know is that my mother decided there was something that happened. In the end, they didn't get raped because I guess the guys had a change of heart. There was 2 guys. I remember that detail for some reason. But there was something involving a Bible. I remember that. And my mother took that as a sign and decided to A, try and give up using hardcore drugs, and B, to turn back to God. Now, she did come from a religious household. Oh, there's actually somebody I should talk about. Okay, I'm going to talk about somebody else in my family, my mother's side of the family. There is even, I've talked about my, the parents of my mother, but there are 2 people that are going to come into play later in my life. In fact, there's a few people, but the only ones I'm going to talk about right now is my great-grandmother and great-grandfather. So for starters, my great-grandmother is still alive. She actually turned 100 years old this year. Unfortunately, I don't think she has much longer to live. This is skipping way ahead because this was only earlier this year. So my great-grandmother was doing very fine, surprisingly for her age, for the longest time. She's been alive since 1918. She's a fantastic writer. One thing which I am internally grateful to my mother for is that, like 20 years ago, she gave my great-grandmother a diary and asked her to write her life story in it. She did write it, because my great-grandmother is a fantastic writer, but I've read her entire diary that she ended up writing because she ended up giving it back to my mother and I had a good chance to read it. And what I can say on that front is she lived a very interesting life herself, and I'll probably tell more of her stories. I might read more from it another time. She's an amazing writer in my opinion. And I'm not just saying that because she's family, I just mean she is legitimately great at writing. She was an English major, so what can I say about that? But she is a very interesting woman. She's still alive, but unfortunately her health condition worsened majorly within the last year. In her late 90s, she was still surprisingly spruce and like she could walk on her own and all that, but there was an unfortunate thing where she was at church and there was a kid that was running and playing, and she accidentally tripped over and fell from the kid, and this unfortunately started becoming the downfall of her health. Now maybe she's gonna start decreasing in health anyway. She was getting close to 100 anyway, but there's somewhat of a history in my family of people who are old falling. As my dad and I have sometimes joked about in somewhat of a dark way, is that there's not a lot of things that kill our family. Our family actually, surprisingly, our family doesn't really get dementia. Our family doesn't get a lot of weird diseases. We have good hearts, apparently. And a lot of my family even lives pretty long lives. Like, if nothing happens, usually our family members live to be 80 plus. But there are 2 things that kill a lot of our family members. The first one is what I am saying. Well, I'll say the more obvious one first. The first one is cancer. Our family, unfortunately, has a really bad history of cancer, and there will be more cancer coming into the story pretty soon. One thing which I'm afraid of, both for myself and my siblings, is that one of us will get cancer and not catch it soon enough and die from it. One of the most serious causes of concern, probably for me and my lifespan, will be cancer. The second thing that kills us is that a lot of us, for some reason, in the elderly age, something happens, they fall in a really bad way, and that fall does something either terrible to their health or it's a fatal fall. For some reason, cancer and falling are the 2 things, which kill a lot of people in our family. Okay, so great-grandmother, I'll talk much more about her, but she grew up from 1918. I have her old diary on hand. I do respect her a lot. Unfortunately, after the fall, her health has worsened tremendously over the last year. Her health's just been deteriorating more and more. So I'm like, she's probably not going to be with us much longer, and I'm a little bit sad about that. I did live with her for a period of time. I'll tell more about that story later, but anyway, my great-grandfather died when I was in 6th grade at the time. I know the date that he died because it was ironic. I know I was in 6th grade because I remember the class. I was told when I was in class, which is why I remember that. And also the date he died was April 1st, so when I was first told, I thought it was some sort of cruel April Fool's joke. But no, it wasn't an April Fool's joke. He just died on April Fool's. But to say a little bit more on that front, I did get to know him because, again, I lived for a period of time with my great-grandmother, which was also when he was alive, when I lived with my great-grandfather. But unfortunately, I never really got to know him well because, well, I should also mention this, my great-grandmother grew up a farm girl, and she's still a farm girl basically to this day. My great-grandfather, a bit different, but he was a good, kind-hearted person. When he was growing up, one of the things that I remember hearing the most is that he decided to be a medic when he had to go through army stuff because he didn't want to kill anyone. But he ended up, there's a lot of people who loved him. I learned that through the long run. He did a lot of good things for a lot of people. He's a very kind-hearted person, did a lot of good over the years. He and my great-grandmother were married for over, yeah, they were married for over 50 years. But anyways, unfortunately, I never got to know him like that when I lived with him, and the only time I got to know him, he's not the blood family I'm related to, apparently. There's a longer story there to talk about later, but he did get dementia, so when I knew him, the only period of time I knew is that he would, when I couldn't understand a word he ever said when he tried talking. He would talk in a way where it was impossible to understand him, and I think he wasn't unaware of the situation he was in, but he forgot a lot of things, and he had trouble communicating and understanding, I guess is the best way to say it. In a lot of ways, he was almost like a giant elderly baby, and that was basically how I knew him as when I lived with him and my great-grandmother for a period of time. Okay, so talking a little bit more there, let's finally get to when I come into the picture. It's all about me. No, I mean, I've been talking now for, wow, 42 minutes, and I've just been rambling here, and I've been up for over 24 hours. I should probably sleep soon. But I can say this. So, I'm going to save a lot of my story for later. I was born in Portland, Oregon. I was born in a little pink house. The pink house still stands to this day. I know exactly where it is, too. I don't think it's pink anymore, though. I think they repainted it. Anyways. I have one interesting birth fact, and you're probably going to hear me say this in whatever next video, because I'm probably not going to share too much of my story to save it all for next time, because this is all the prologue stuff, you could say. Probably the most interesting fact about my birth, well, two things. First of all, my parents were very big on home births. So me and my two siblings were not born in the hospital. We were born at home with, you know, the people. I mean, there's people and supplies and stuff they had, but all of us were home birthed. But the more interesting thing is I was actually born during a solar eclipse. A true fact, even. And not only was I born during the solar eclipse, the time of my birth certificate is the same as the darkest moment of the eclipse. There's my little birthing fun fact, you could say. So, I mean, I could say a lot of things about me, really. I, of course, was born, as I just mentioned earlier, before my parents got married. In fact, I think I was a few months old by the time I got married. They probably wouldn't have got married if I didn't come into the picture, but hey, what are you going to do? I don't regret them getting married. I love living, and I love my two siblings, which they both had later, which we'll get more to that much later. So I have not mentioned who I am this whole entire time. My name is Ryan, if you're curious enough and didn't know that for some reason. And I have two younger siblings. One of them is Timothy, but all of us call him Timmy, and he prefers Timmy, and Nicole. Now, Nicole is the middle child, and Timmy is the youngest child. We'll get to them, most certainly, in the near future. So I'll describe the first year of my life, and I think that's as far as I'll go. So I don't remember my first year of my life, obviously. But I am the oldest of the current generation of my family. any immediate family, any family which has any sort of close blood ties, all that fun stuff. I am older than all of my cousins, all of my nephews. I am the oldest of my generation of our family tree. And because of that, my birth was somewhat celebrated. My grandmother I mentioned, but there's other people. My great-grandmother, who I just mentioned, actually made me this glass doll of myself when I was born, and I still have the glass doll, apparently, so that's cool. It does look like me when younger. I was not born bald like many babies. In fact, apparently I was born with a full set of hair, which is kind of rare. My hair when I first was born was curly, but my hair is no longer curly. Well, okay, there is somewhat of an exception to this. If I grow my hair out, it doesn't curl, but like if I grow my bangs out, my bangs will grow up to my eyebrows, and before they get my hair, they'll start like curling out. They won't curl up into themselves, but they'll like start sticking out that way, and they've always done that. And if I let them grow out a little bit more in the back, there's a little bit of a curl, but you don't really notice that there's a curl because it kind of curls inward. But anyways, like it curls towards my neck, basically. More things to say. So I am white. I have blue eyes. I have brunette hair. However, if I grow a beard, I have a red beard. My mother, I should also mention, has red hair, so that plays into it. My dad had special hair attributes as well. Apparently he was blonde when he was first born, but after a few years, in his young toddler years, his hair went from blonde to black. Which apparently does happen, but it's very rare. Other things, I did mention that earlier. On my side, my first year. So there's a very amusing home video which we have. So my parents, for their honeymoon, decided to go to Hawaii because I was already in the picture. I'm going to have their honeymoon to Hawaii with them. And they have a videotape of their trip to Hawaii then, which we're in a helicopter, and of course I'm just less than a year old. I'm sleeping in this helicopter in this little baby carriage thing, and they are flying above an erupting volcano, and I'm just there in the tape, sound asleep as this fucking helicopter above a erupting volcano. That's fun, right? I think it's fun. There's not too much more I can say about my first year of life, because obviously I don't remember much. There's some pictures, which is the most I can say about it. There's pictures of me playing with this lawn dog, which apparently was a dog that another part of the family had. Yeah. What else can I really say? There's not a whole lot of stories. Actually, there's one thing which I guess I should share. We lived in an apartment for a period of time. For the first few years of my life, they grew up in an apartment. Even though I was only there until I was like 2.5, 3 years old, I still remember a few things in the apartment. They're not like very solid memories. There's just a collection of small memories which I have, which I'm surprised I remember that back that far. I remember like anything, let alone as much as I remember, because it's not like I remember like one thing. I remember bits and pieces of the time when we lived there, and I'm a little bit surprised how much I do remember of it, and apparently it's all fairly accurate. So we've revisited where we used to live, and I'm surprised I remember the layout, because the memories I remember. I'm going to talk more about this stuff probably in the next video, but what I will say for now is I have memories of being in the place that we used to live at. My parents got this one sort of swing thing. It wasn't really a swing, it's an indoor thing, but it's like this carpet. We had the carpet floor, I should mention. But there was a carpeted floor, and they got like this carpeted swing thing. It was for a baby like me, say. And it's like this big thing, and you get put on top of it, and they push it. I push in what these were called, but I remember being spun on that. I remember when I was able to walk, I was sort of running outside, and there was a pool with these apartments. So, and there was also a sauna in the pool, and I wasn't really allowed to use the sauna, obviously, but I remember being a little curious child, just sort of waddling, not in the pool area, but I sort of waddle and look around the Min's locker room that's next to the pool and looking inside the sauna. And I remember it's a weird memory for me because I'm so small that everything looks huge in the memory. So it's my family, I should also mention, are all fairly tall people. So it's just kind of weird to have a memory of me actually being that small. I remember seeing an episode of Scooby-Doo and Sesame Street. I remember that I watched some TV, and those were two of the things I ended up seeing. Also, something which I should mention is that my mother, and I remember her in some memories, and that's for probably good reason. My mother was a stay-at-home mom, and she was like that for really all three of us, me and my two siblings. She was a very good mother. She did a great job taking care of us from a young age. She nurtured us a lot, and as she said, we were all very good babies. She can tell she was very happy as a mother in that position of taking care of us while we were young. She will tell us, of course I don't remember if I did or didn't, but she tells us that we hardly cried at all. In fact, we giggled a lot. Once my sister was born, apparently we had this made-up language made of squeaking sounds that we, at least we did to each other all the time. Like just high-pitched sounds, basically. I'm trying to think. There's so many other stories I'm going to tell in the near future. I think I'm going to save them all for the next video. Now, I don't actually know who's going to watch this, let alone who's going to watch all 50 minutes of it, I guess. Comment below if you have. No, but I don't know if anyone's going to be interested in these videos. I just kind of feel like making them. This wasn't the most interesting video. In fact, frankly, it's probably the least interesting video I'm going to be sharing, partially because I'm recording this at a time where I'm super tired. But also, you know, none of these are, at this point, I haven't told anything that's my actual memories. These are all just things collected off to me and things I know from talking to the family. There's more which I know as well, but, you know, it's not really important for this. And it's not really my story. It's all story of stuff that we're going for. The reason I'm doing this is despite the fact I'm kind of pretty much a shut-in, I've had a surprising variety of life experiences, and I guess we'll go into that next time. But we got done with the prologue. I hope you guys enjoyed just listening to the same track on loop for a while, and me talking, and yeah. I hope those who have listened got some form of enjoyment out of it. Hopefully next time I ramble, I'll be a little bit more conscious and not half asleep while I'm talking. That's part of the fun. I'm probably going to post this and I'm going to regret it. Both because I don't like talking. I don't very often talk and share my history. Though I have a lot of stories which I can share. And, you know, it's just a black screen video, and that's partially to deter people, but also just because it's easier for me. I probably chose to, I bet I'm gonna like sleep on this and wake up as like, oh god, Ryan, why did you do that when you were sleep deprived? Why did you choose to do this during this period of time? Are you really gonna commit to fucking making videos explaining stuff in your life? You have a lot of stories. Are you gonna sit here and try and recall and tell the stories you can? Boy, oh boy. Well, all the same, we'll see how I feel when I fucking wake up again. Hopefully this was enjoyable enough, and until next time I shall bid adieu to all of you.